You probably think you've got the whole men versus women thing figured out. But the real difference isn't about who feels more, who loves harder, or who cares more. It's about how each side processes what they feel. And once that clicks, a ton of confusing behavior suddenly makes total sense. Topic 1. Men and women usually deal with problems differently. One of the biggest differences between men and women shows up the moment something goes wrong. A guy hears about a problem and his brain jumps straight to, how do we fix this? It's almost automatic for him to start throwing out advice, building a game plan, or trying to knock the obstacle out of the way. But the woman next to him might not want a solution at all. She just wants to feel heard first. That mismatch can create a weird situation where both people genuinely care, and somehow they both end up frustrated anyway. Picture a woman telling a guy she had an awful day at work. He listens for 30 seconds and goes, "You should probably just talk to your boss tomorrow." In his head, that's him being supportive. He's trying to help. But from her side, it sounds like he blew right past the part where she just wanted someone to get why the day sucked. Nobody's really the villain here. They're just running the same problem through two totally different emotional filters. A guy who's got his head on straight learns that helping doesn't always mean fixing. Sometimes the smarter move is to slow down and just ask, do you want advice, or do you just want me to listen? That one little question can save you an entire argument and completely flip the direction of a conversation. Because once a man gets that difference, he starts noticing something even bigger. The real fight usually isn't about the problem itself. It's about what each person thinks should happen next. Topic 2. Men bottle up their feelings more than they even realize. A lot of guys grow up learning a weird lesson about emotions. Feel them, sure, but don't you dare let anyone see them. A kid falls and scrapes his knee, and he hears, "Shake it off." A teenager gets rejected, and instead of admitting it stung, he cracks a joke about it. Fast forward, and that same guy becomes a pro at saying, "I'm good," while there's a full-blown storm brewing underneath. Half the time he doesn't even realize how much that habit has shaped the way he talks, loves, and handles stress. Here's the interesting part. Hiding your emotions doesn't mean you're feeling less. A lot of the time it just means a guy has learned to turn feelings into action instead. Instead of saying he's anxious, he grinds harder at work. Instead of admitting he's hurt, he goes quiet. Instead of saying he's scared of losing someone, he convinces himself he doesn't care. From the outside, that can look like strength, but there's a huge difference between controlling your emotions and just avoiding them. Real control means you can feel something deeply without letting it run your behavior. This matters big time in relationships, because people can't respond to emotions they never actually see. A man doesn't need to turn every conversation into a therapy session or spill every thought in his head. But learning to say something like, "That actually got to me," or "I'm under a lot of pressure right now," builds a kind of honesty that silence just can't. And once he starts doing that, something surprising happens. The people around him finally realize the quiet guy in the room might be feeling the most, not the least. Topic 3. The same words can mean two totally different things. One of the most overlooked differences between men and women is that the exact same words can land completely differently depending on who's hearing them. A guy might say, "I need some space," and genuinely just mean he needs a minute to clear his head. A woman might hear those same words as emotional distance, rejection, or a red flag that something's wrong with the relationship. The words didn't change. The meaning attached to them did. It happens the other way, too. A woman might say, "I'm fine," fully expecting the guy to pick up on the fact that she clearly isn't. He takes it at face value and figures the conversation's over. She takes his lack of follow-up as proof he doesn't care enough to notice. Now they're both annoyed, and neither one gets why. It's like they're having the same conversation on two completely different radio stations. A guy who understands this doesn't turn into a mind reader. He just gets more precise with how he communicates. Instead of guessing, he can just ask, "When you say you're fine, do you actually want to talk about it?" And when he needs space, he can make it crystal clear. "I need an hour to clear my head, but I'm not walking away from this conversation." A few extra words like that can save you hours of unnecessary tension. Because communication isn't just about what you say, it's about what the other person thinks those words mean. And that matters even more when emotions are running hot. If you're getting something out of this video, do us a favor and hit subscribe. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one genuinely helps us get there. If you want more content on men, relationships, psychology, and the stuff nobody actually explains, come hang out with us. Topic 4. Men and women often handle conflict on totally different wavelengths. When an argument kicks off, one of the clearest differences is what each person tries to do next. A guy usually wants to end it fast, find the practical fix, and move on. To him, dragging the conversation out just feels like poking the wound deeper. But the other person might see the unfinished conversation completely differently. If it hasn't been fully talked through, the emotional side of it hasn't actually been resolved. That's where a small disagreement can spiral into an exhausting loop. Say a couple's arguing about something small that happened earlier that day. He says, "We already talked about it. Let's just move on." In his mind, that's him offering peace. But she might hear, "Your feelings don't matter." Meanwhile, if she keeps circling back to the details, he might hear, "Nothing I do is ever going to be enough." Now they both feel misunderstood. And instead of dealing with what's actually going on underneath, they're both just playing defense. A more mature guy learns to look past the words and ask what the conflict is really asking of him. Is she looking for reassurance, respect, accountability, or just proof that she's actually being heard? And he should be just as willing to say what he needs. "I want to fix this, but I need 10 minutes to cool off so I don't say something dumb." That's not weakness. That's emotional discipline. But there's another layer to all this. Because sometimes a guy's biggest mistake isn't how he handles conflict. It's what he assumes she actually wants from him in the first place. Topic 5. What men think women want versus what actually matters. A lot of guys get taught, directly or indirectly, that the way to win a woman over is to become more impressive. More money, nicer clothes, a better body, a fancier car, a bigger career, a more confident image. None of that is automatically bad. But here's the trap a lot of men fall into. They end up performing a version of themselves instead of building a life they actually respect. And ironically, trying too hard to prove your worth usually makes you look less secure, not more. What actually matters more in a relationship is way less flashy: consistency, emotional stability, honesty, and making sure your words and actions actually line up. A guy who says he's going to call and actually calls is saying something powerful without saying much at all. A guy who can disagree without blowing up, listen without going passive, and hold his standards without needing constant approval is showing a kind of confidence money can't buy. It's not about being perfect. It's about being predictable in the best way possible. That's not to say attraction has nothing to do with ambition, looks, status, or success. It does. But attraction built purely on performance gets exhausting, because eventually you're stuck constantly proving you're worth the attention. A better question to ask yourself: would I still respect the man I'm becoming if no one were watching? That question changes everything, because once a guy stops living for validation, he actually builds real confidence. And that leads to another huge misunderstanding. What men think women see when they look at them isn't always what women are actually seeing. Topic 6. What women often get wrong about men. One of the biggest misunderstandings about men is assuming that whatever he's not saying isn't affecting him. A guy can walk in the door, say, "I'm fine," sit down and look totally normal, while his head is carrying pressure from work, money, family, or that nagging fear that he's just not doing enough. A lot of men don't talk about that stuff right away because they've learned to process it privately. From the outside, that can look like indifference. On the inside, it can feel like dragging around a weight nobody else can see. That's exactly why a man's silence gets misread so often. When he pulls back after a rough day, he's usually not punishing anyone or losing interest. A lot of times, he's just trying to get his head straight before he says something he doesn't mean. He might need a quiet drive, a workout, a shower, or just an hour alone before he can actually put his thoughts into words. That doesn't automatically make him emotionally unavailable. Knowing when to step back instead of reacting on impulse can actually be a sign of maturity. The problem only starts when silence becomes the only language he knows how to speak. A healthier guy learns to give his silence a little context so people aren't left guessing. Instead of just disappearing emotionally, he can say something like, "I've had a rough day. I need a little time, but we're good." That's a tiny sentence, but it wipes out a mountain of uncertainty. It lets him get his space without leaving the other person feeling abandoned. And once you get this, another question becomes impossible to ignore. If men and women can go through the exact same situation and experience it so differently, what happens when each side just assumes the other one thinks the same way they do? Topic 7. The real difference. They're not always living in the same reality. The deepest difference between men and women might not be about who feels more, loves more, or cares more. It might just be that they can stand in the exact same moment and experience it through two completely different emotional lenses. A guy sees an argument and thinks, "How do we solve this?" While she's thinking, "Does he even understand why this hurt me?" Neither one is wrong. They're just locked onto different parts of the same moment. This is where a lot of relationships quietly go off the rails. A guy judges her reaction and thinks, "Why is this such a big deal?" While she looks at his reaction and wonders, "Why doesn't this seem to matter to him at all?" The mistake is assuming the other person should naturally process life the exact same way you do. A smarter guy doesn't have to agree with every reaction, but he learns to get curious instead of defensive. He asks, "What am I missing here?" That one question alone can turn a fight into a chance to actually understand someone. And there's something powerful in that shift. Understanding a difference doesn't mean giving up your standards, going soft, or pretending every behavior is fine. It means you stop wasting energy fighting a reality you could just learn to navigate instead. You get more deliberate with your words, more aware of your own emotions, and a lot better at spotting what the person in front of you actually needs. Because a guy who understands people doesn't just get better at relationships. He gets harder to manipulate, harder to confuse, and way more in control of how he responds instead of just reacting blindly. Conclusion. At the end of the day, understanding the difference between men and women isn't about picking a side. It's about realizing two people can go through the exact same moment, feel it just as deeply, and still walk away interpreting it in completely different ways. A man doesn't lose anything by understanding how a woman thinks or communicates, and he doesn't have to drop his standards to become more emotionally aware. If anything, it's the opposite. The more he understands, the less he has to react blindly. So the next time a woman reacts in a way he doesn't get, instead of thinking, "Why is she doing this?" he can ask a better question, "What am I not seeing?" And when she misreads his silence, his need for space, or how he handles pressure, he can stop expecting her to read his mind and just tell her what's going on. That's where real maturity starts, not in knowing everything about women, but in becoming a man who can understand people without losing himself along the way. Because here's the real question. How many arguments in his life were actually caused by the problem itself? And how many were caused by two people reading the same problem in two different ways? How many times has he expected someone to understand something he never actually explained? And how many times has he judged someone's reaction without even trying to understand what was going on underneath it? Those questions aren't comfortable, but they're worth sitting with. And a guy willing to ask them is already playing a different game. If this video gave you a new way of looking at things, the real test starts after it ends. Next time there's tension, listen before you fix, communicate before you disappear, and get curious before you get defensive. Those small shifts can completely change how you handle relationships, conflict, and even yourself. So if you want to keep learning about male psychology, relationships, confidence, and the deeper stuff between men and women, subscribe and turn on notifications. The goal is 1,000 subscribers, and there's a lot more worth digging into along the way.